Good evening and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to our special episode of webinar today and those who have connected with us from all across the globe. My name is Kasir Ahmed and I'm the Executive Director of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada. Before we begin our webinar, as a tradition, let me do the treaty recognition. The University or the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day that we are going to commemorate. Today is the day of our efforts, our willingness to eliminate violence against women. And this 25th of November is particularly declared by United Nations to highlight the unending cycle of violence perpetrated against women, and it's a global phenomenon. And today I'm very proud to present our research assistant, Khujista Rahman, who planned the whole event today and invited guests from all across the continent, I believe. And she's going to introduce the guests today, and we are going to listen to their reflections on this special occasion. And I will take aside, I'll go to the wings now and hand over the floor to Khujista Rahman. Khujista, floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kasir. Hello, everyone. I'm Khujista, a researcher at the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada. Thank you for attending our webinar. We're very excited to have you and our amazing speakers today. In addition to today being the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we are holding this event to honor Helen Betty Osborne and commemorate the 50th anniversary of her passing. Helen Betty Osborne was a 19-year-old Cree Indigenous woman. She was abducted and brutally murdered on November 13th, 1971, in the Pas, Manitoba. Her case, which was one of the most prominent examples of violence against Indigenous people, sparked an uprising and demand by Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to investigate how the justice system handled matters involving Indigenous populations in Manitoba. This led to the creation of the Act to establish and validate the public inquiry into the administration of justice in Aboriginal people, which is still legally binding today. Violence against women and girls is one of the most persistent and devastating human rights violations we see in our world today, and remains largely unreported due to the silence, stigma, and shame surrounding it. Women and girls face discrimination in all spheres of life, whether it's public or private, whether it's psychological, physical, sexual, or financial. So today, our esteemed guests will share their thoughts on two important questions. The first question is, what does it mean to be a woman living in a male-dominated world? And the second question is, what kind of measures should be in place to ensure that women are safe and have access to equal opportunities? Joining us today, we have Darcia Senft, who is employed with the Law Society of Manitoba as General Counsel and Director of Policy and Ethics. She provides opinions on matters affecting the Law Society and governance of its members, and provides advice and direction to lawyers relating to professional responsibility. Darcia served as a member of the Legal Help Center's Programming Committee for several years. She has been a keen supporter of the Manitoba Theatre Centre, having participated as a cast member and many joint fundraising productions with the Manitoba Bar Association. Darcia has been an occasional instructor for the Law Society's CPLED program. She was also a sessional lecturer at the Faculty of Law at the University of Manitoba, where she co-taught the Legal Profession and Professional Responsibility course. And very recently, she became a member of World Vision's Power Over Impact Council, and also joined as a senior advisor at the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada. So welcome, Darcia. We're thrilled to have you as one of our senior advisors.
Next,
sorry.
Sorry, you're going to finish your introductions?
Yeah, that's the plan. We're going to do that. Next, we have Ileah Ouimette. Lee was born and raised in Ontario, hails from Adele's Bearban, Tamagami, Nipissing region. Lee holds Métis intertribal status. She has a degree in paralegal studies and was recently published in the Humber Journal of Paralegal Access to Justice 2019 for her outstanding article called Education and Indigenous Access to Justice. Lee mastered the art of beading from a young age, starting with weaving, sewing, crochet, and knitting. Lee was inspired to showcase her work and launched her business called Lee's Indigenous Boutique in 2019, which is located in Toronto, Canada. And lastly, we have Zara Chaudhary. Zara is currently a first-year law student at the University of Birmingham in hopes of working in the area of family law one day. She has over 5 years of experience in the sector of law, working as a legal assistant for a female sole practitioner. Her aim is to help women and children have a voice through the law and to be able to assist them from any domestic violence they may be facing. So these were our speakers, and before we dive into our topics, I'm going to briefly talk about the Q&A section. Once the speakers have had the opportunity to discuss the questions, we'll open the floor for some questions for them to respond to for about 5 minutes. And if we're short on time and can't respond to them, participants should type in their questions and we'll send these to our speakers to respond and email them back to you. So if you have any questions, please include your email with your questions and who you're addressing the question to. Okay, all right, so we'll start with our first speaker, Darcia Senft, to talk on today's first question, which is, what are some of your experiences of being a woman living in a male-dominated world? Darcia, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I could say at the beginning that is such a huge question, and if we had 48 hours to each talk about what our experiences are like, I see that my guest panelists are nodding their heads vigorously. It's challenging to try to cover that in a few minutes, but I'll do my best. I'm going to speak, of course, as I only can, my experience, my own personal experiences and my observations of others, but this will be, of course, through my lens as a woman in the legal profession. I was called to the bar in Manitoba in 1988, so I'm kind of getting to be up there in terms of years at the bar. So I've had a lot of varied experiences. What did they start out with? Well, when I was an articling student, I was asked some questions that were actually inappropriate at the articling interviews. So right from the get-go, there were some issues where I basically turned the question around to the male lawyer who was interviewing me and said, are you asking me, A, if I intend to get married in the next 5 years, and B, if I intend to have children? Where the lawyer then chuckled and said, well, no, I wouldn't be doing that because that would be, inappropriate. But that, of course, is exactly what the lawyer was doing. So, right from the beginning, sadly, that was my first impression when I was going through articling interviews as I guess at the time, I would have been a second-year law student because you set up that process earlier. I can say happily that a lot has changed since I first started to practice. And I've heard some other, I'll say, war stories from women in the profession who are senior to me. One woman who I just adored, who told me that when she would go to the courthouse, at first there wasn't even a female robing room. So she went into the robing room one day and just started removing her clothes to get dressed into her court outfit, put on her gown and her tabs, whereupon all the men in the room started getting very uncomfortable, which is ironic, because of course she was the one in the male-dominated room with no female dressing room. And I hear those stories and I think, wow, we came a long way by the time I was an articling student. And I'm happy to say that I believe there's been a lot of progress since then. Sadly, I'm very well aware of some of the recent studies that have been published. I'm aware of statistics coming out of, for example, the Law Society of Ontario, our neighboring province in Canada. They have Discrimination and Harassment Counsel, right on staff at the Law Society. We have a comparable position here with our equity officer, and the role there is to take in calls, complaints, concerns from anyone who feels that they are receiving treatment that would amount to harassment, whether that's harassment or sexual harassment and or discrimination. And then they're given advice about what things they can do to address those concerns. Sadly, I know that in 2018, the Law Society of Ontario, they did a report. That's the last year, I believe, for which a report is available. And it highlighted a trend that had been earlier observed, that there were an increasing number of legal professionals contacting the Law Society with complaints of abuse in their workplaces. So that's troubling. Having said that, maybe there's an increasing trend because there was an increasing awareness that people could use that resource. So it's not necessarily that there was an actual increase. Maybe that had been the case all along, and it's wonderful now that there is a resource available for people to call in and get some assistance in terms of how they can walk that very tricky line, especially if there's a power imbalance, as there typically is in a male-dominated profession. More often, there are male partners at law firms in the traditional law firm, and quite often it's additional concerns about power imbalance. It may be an articling student, a female, a junior, who's calling with concerns that they've been approached inappropriately by their principal. In other words, they're the one who's supposed to be mentoring them and teaching them about how to be a lawyer in the profession. And there's a lot of concern about how can they possibly, ask that lawyer to stop when they are in a position of such control. And there's that real power imbalance. And so that's very tricky, but I'm very happy that we now have Law Society staff in place largely across the country to help people navigate the way through that tricky area. I know too that the International Bar Association, I'm just going to look down at my notes here, but in preparing for this today, they conducted a study in 2018, a survey, and they received responses from almost 7,000 legal professionals from 135 countries, including Canada, from a variety of legal workplaces, including law firms, government settings, in-house counsel. And I hate to say it, but the results were not positive, in the sense that 1 in 2 female survey respondents reported experiencing bullying in the workplace. 1 in 3 female respondents reported experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace. And I know that in Ontario, for example, they get about 15 complaints to the Law Society's Discipline and Harassment Council each month. And sexual harassment, sadly, is the most common complaint to that council there, representing about a quarter of their complaints. And they talk about power imbalance being really at the root of a lot of these issues, and that articling students are especially likely to be victimized because of that power imbalance. So I'm happy to say that in my own experience as a lawyer, I haven't experienced a lot of that troubling conduct. I mentioned some at the beginning of my career. I know that when I announced I was getting married, I had a male partner at the time not say congratulations, but be careful. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we don't want you getting pregnant or anything. If I were a male lawyer, I probably would have gotten a pat on the back. At the time, smoking was still a thing, and maybe I would have even gotten a cigar. Sadly, I didn't experience that. So as I say, it's I'm buoyed by the fact that things have improved. I've seen improvements along the way. I'm saddened that there is still a lot of activity going on out there that doesn't make women feel safe in their workplaces. So I'm talking about safety in a workplace, whether it's physical safety, worrying about sexual assault or harassment, and psychological safety. That how can you feel safe at your job and do your job to the best of your abilities when you're feeling like you have to look over your shoulder to make sure that there isn't somebody trying to do something inappropriate. I don't know if I've got more time or if I've used up my time. I'm not looking at the clock. So if you can, I'm going to rely on you to tell me if there's additional.
I think we can definitely say more if we have time.
Okay. So in terms of what it's like to be a female in a male-dominated world, I would say that I'm so proud of my colleagues out there who, despite those incredible challenges, are so resilient. And look at the name of this organization. I mean, resilience is key. And I can tell you that quite often when you're subjected to that kind of inequality, the last thing you feel is resilient. You know, you might go home and dissolve in a puddle of tears and complain that it's so unfair. And yet those experiences, it's a cliche, but true, that those kinds of adverse things that happen to you typically make you stronger. I say typically because I think it can have the opposite effect, of course. It can wear you down and just wear you down and wear you down. And maybe you were resilient and you've just had it up to here because you can't expect to be continually subjected to unfair treatment and be like a rock star and just always be showing up at work with a smile on your face and pretend that it isn't affecting your mental health and or your physical health. Because of course, having mental health issues can lead to, of course, physical, very real physical issues, ulcers, you name it. So, you know, in terms of a female just living in a male-dominated world, I have to deal with the very real concern that when I'm walking from the parking lot to my building, I have to be on guard. I've said to my husband, you have no idea what that's like, being a female in a male world where you are constantly, and I will say that, hypervigilant whenever you are out in public, especially if you're alone after dark, whether you're walking with keys in your hand, or I will call my spouse sometimes on the phone to show I'm on the phone, I'm speaking with somebody, they know where I am. All of these things that we take for granted as women, it's second nature. It's like breathing. I look in the back seat of my car before I get in. All of those things. I lock my doors immediately. So that's something that I've gotten used to living with, which is maybe now we're getting used to living with masks. And I don't think that's appropriate. It's just a reality. On top of that, when women have to worry about being safe in their own work environments as lawyers, you know, in my context, I think that's appalling and it has to stop. We have enough to deal with. The practice of law itself is stressful enough. We shouldn't have to deal on top of it with worrying about whether we should get into the elevator with a senior partner who's known for sexually harassing young female associates. I can say that at the start of my career, it wasn't a lawyer at my firm, but it was well known among young female lawyers that it wasn't particularly a wise idea to get into a situation, whether it's an elevator, which is, again, ridiculous that you have to be thinking about these things, with a senior lawyer of some prominence and power at a firm. So I'm hoping that with more discussion about these issues and how real they are, with more supports in place for young female, students, articling students and lawyers, that it can only get better as there's more awareness, a spotlight put on these issues, and more accountability.
Thank you, Darcia, for sharing your experiences. I agree, even though we as a society have made progress, but some of us still can relate to the issues you've highlighted, even today. Next I'll give the floor to Ileah.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting there. And I'm using a fancy headset because the water main broke outside today and they're going at it. They're still working away with the construction. Very loud machinery. So I must say thank you first for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I'll start off by saying Ileah Indigenous. My name is Ileah. I am from Northern Ontario, but I live in Toronto. I was raised pretty much in Southern Ontario. I come from Indigenous background on both sides of my family. My father is non-status. My mother has Métis intertribal status. Growing up, I was one female in a family full of many males, and they made it known to me that being a female was a disadvantage, and I would have to fight my way through life. So there was a lot of teaching me how to fight, actually physically fight, and other things that Darcia was mentioning about. This is how you hold your keys when you're walking home. This is, how you should keep your nails to make sure that you can, scratch people. And they would go into detail about having, evidence underneath your nails and things like this. And so they would be giving me these crazy tips as a young, like 8 years old, because I was starting to go for walks and hang out with, your friends and ride your bike and do things outside in the world when you aren't with your family. So that began very young for me. But going through life as a young woman in my teens was difficult. Right as soon as I had developed, I think I didn't really get noticed until then, and once I did, it was very uncomfortable. Just taking the TTC here in Toronto was a big concern of mine every time. There would be people following me home. I'd get aggressively catcalled, not just like, oh, you look beautiful today, but it was aggressive. And again, following you home for some reason, that's a thing. And so you have to learn to, cross the street, take a different way home, change your routines, wear baggy clothing, wear bigger clothing. So there was a lot of different things that I did in my younger years to, I guess, protect myself. But none of that actually matters, because if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. While I was taking my law degree, I was doing my placement, and during my placement, I was actually attacked, in broad daylight. It was I think it was like 11:30 in the morning. It was actually Indigenous Day. So here, I think it's June 21st or June 26th here in Canada. We have Indigenous Day here. And so he started to follow me and he attacked me from behind. I was able to fight him off, chase him down, call the police. The guy ended up in jail. And that's when I found out that he was already on charges for doing the exact same thing to another woman, like a block away. So he was released from jail immediately. And then he was doing it again. And so he ended up all over Ontario, collecting these assault charges against women. So I think that, when you do hear other people saying, well, what were you wearing? Or, what could you have done differently? It really doesn't matter. I was on break during my paralegal while I was trying to obtain all my paralegal hours to graduate. I was in a law attire. I was not, in any way making myself out there. So that's just what I had to do out in the world. When I was going through my education, a lot of our teachers and our professors were judges and lawyers, and so I distinctly remember one professor. He was a small claims judge, and he said, I prefer to see women in my courtroom with blonde hair and in a dress suit. And so at that moment, I thought, wow, I would never dye my hair, but I eventually ended up dyeing my hair blonde, so these things do get into your head, no matter how strong you are, no matter what. And I ended up not following the law degree just because I couldn't, in my mind, it was a lot of mental strain. So I switched and chose a different career path, definitely. But I think that in the field of law, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stereotypes that you have to break through. And so Darcia, huge chimigwich to you going out there and breaking through all those barriers. It takes a whole village of women to be able to do this. This movement of women coming forward has been going on for many, many generations now. So it is better, but it will still take some time. I don't know if I have more time. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention either.
No, you have a lot of time. You can talk.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to touch shed some light on, I guess, would be, as an Indigenous woman, I've had some trouble when it comes to obtaining jobs and how to act in the workplace, and also workplace culture. That's something that's affected me deeply. I was working in the insurance field for a little while after I obtained my degree, and it's a very male-dominated company I was working for, and they don't really accept that, you know, you're a single mother with children and sorry, I can't come in this Saturday because I have a sick kid, right? So there's a lot of that, but there was also a lot of passive aggressive behavior within the workplace. So if I would say something like, yes, of course, I'm Indigenous, they would say something like, are you sure? Or, you know, you look white to me, you know. So there was a lack of, I guess, cultural competency in that world towards what an Indigenous person is, and, you know, what indigeneity is, and what we look like in today's society, rather than the image that has been a stereotype for so long, right? So that was always difficult for me. And in certain cases, when I would come out and say, yeah, I'm Indigenous, it would then become another sexual thing for the male workplace colleagues of mine. They would then not just, you know, come at me sexually and make it sexual advances. It would be more like an Indigenous version of it. And so it was another layer of, I guess, male harm. I don't know how else to say it, but yeah, it definitely, I learned very quickly to hide my indigeneity. I'll dress differently. I will not wear my earrings. I have different tones of voices that I've used. I definitely have different posture and even confidence levels. I find in a heavily male room, I will act the part of a weaker woman because I feel as if maybe I'll be my words will be heard better, right? So there's all of these different things that I do as a woman to try to fit in better with a male room, definitely. But thank you.
Ileah, thank you so much for opening up about your experiences and for being so vulnerable. We're really grateful for having you as a speaker, and I think we should all be having these tough conversations and to raise awareness. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being our speaker. Next we have Zarah.
Hi. My experiences as a woman living in a male-dominated world is very similar to Darcia and Ileah. Just that stated earlier that I have experience in the legal field. I've worked for both male and female lawyers, and my experiences with both have been completely different. Working under a male lawyer, I've always felt undermined and beneath him due to my gender. He was an owner of a personal injury law firm, and he treated me and other women as if we were replaceable, as if we did not bring anything to the table, even though I worked extremely long hours with him while trying to do my undergrad. His tone would completely change when talking to a woman versus talking to a male. There were times where I would walk into a conversation and he would just completely switch, become this very power-oriented person and try to assert dominance on me. And I just had a question because I was still learning, getting the experience of what personal injury is. You can tell he was a lot more open. He was a lot more comfortable speaking to men than he was with women. I always felt like I had to tiptoe around him. I had to please him. I had to practice in my head what I'm going to say. Like, it was always anxiety ridden for sure. If I made any sort of mistake, he would aggressively and loudly patronize me in front of the rest of the firm, so that everyone would hear. Eventually, I ended up quitting the job because, like Darcia said, it really messes with your mental health, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was extremely depressed. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to get up in the morning. and he decided to withhold my paycheck because I did that. And it was to the point where I had to take him to the Employment Standards Tribunal, and we got the order that he has to release my paycheck. But even then, he went out of his way to email me and tell me to drop my claims, or that he would countertake me to small claims court for doing all of this. He just wasn't like that with me, though. There were instances where I would have to send correspondence via fax, email on his behalf. And some of these letters would be to other women lawyers. And he was extremely demeaning to them. He would question the female lawyer's level of experience, level of intelligence. And it was just extremely unprofessional. He just always felt as if he was above everybody. Not sure why. But at the same time, I was also working with a female sole practitioner. She was one of the best people, like probably my role model in life, and probably the reason why I really want to go into family law. Working with her was a completely different and invaluable experience. She's a Ghanaian female sole practitioner that has taught me the ins and outs of dealing with the legal system as a woman of color. Working with her, I've been exposed to how being a woman of color in a legal field means I need to work twice as hard than a normal person, a normal Caucasian man in that sense. I felt while working with her, I was able to dabble into court and file documents and get to know people and network in that way. And I realized that there was a level of scrutiny that we face sometimes that wouldn't work in our favor, especially when it came to decisions for our clients' court matters. There were some times where you can just tell that there was an imbalance just because we're a woman or we're a person of color. So it definitely feels like we're under a microscope. If we make one mistake, it felt like it was a lot more damaging than if a male lawyer did it. One of the biggest issues we definitely dealt with in family law is domestic violence. And it's something that we've noticed throughout the pandemic get worse and worse. It's come to the point where the fact that the lack of these women being able to leave their homes or their partners now working from home has caused such a huge rise in domestic violence. We've had women call us from payphones. We've had women call us from shelters. We've had women call us secretly from the basement and be afraid to give us their phone number, their address when trying to set up a consultation because they're afraid that their partner will find out. And sometimes these women don't even call back. And sometimes these women stay because they're more afraid to leave than they are to get out and try to get that freedom back. Socially, as a woman of color, like Darcia said, I'm constantly hyper vigilant about everything I do. I feel like I can't get too comfortable with my surroundings. I'm constantly observing everything around me. I have keys in my hand. I have a rape whistle. I carry everything. I'm definitely more afraid to do things alone when it's dark. I'm constantly on the phone with someone. I'm letting them know where I am. I even send them my Uber trips if I have to. I always tell my family where I'm going when I'm coming home because I just don't want to be put in a situation where no one knows what's happening. I used to believe growing up that I'd have a lot more freedom, but I feel like being a woman, my freedom is definitely restricted. Being catcalled on the streets, being followed home, all that stuff. I never thought in my life I would have to do things like that, but it's become a norm. Living in the UK, it's been a very different experience for me, for sure. There's been a huge rise in women being spiked through needles and injections. So it's similar to spiking drinks, but they're putting ketamine, Rohypnol, GHB, date rape drugs through needles that leave bruises when women are pricked with them. And it's been happening in parties, in nightclubs. It's to the point where we had an event on school grounds and 3 women were spiked via injections and no one knows who did it. Women are passing out, they're blacking out, they're losing consciousness, they're projectile vomiting. there's been certain venues that have had more of this issue than others. And because of that, this organization started this campaign called Brum Night In. And it's to boycott some of these venues. They also had a day called Girls Night In, which was the week of Halloween, and it was a campaign for women to not go out and rather stay at home with their friends and have a night in with their friends. I appreciate the campaign, but again, I don't understand why I should not be allowed to go outside and have some fun with my friends. Some people are doing medicine, some people are doing law, some people are in biosciences. Sometimes we need to blow off steam. So I'm stuck in this room for like a good 20 hours a day. I would love to go out and not have to fear for my life. There are certain venues that are also not taking accountability for what's going on. Women will post their experiences of what's happening on their social medias, and the venue owners will delete it and say that there is no hard evidence that this is happening, so they don't take it seriously. Like I said, I don't think it's fair that we have to fear for our lives when we're just trying to have a fun night out. I don't think it's fair that we have to be constantly observing people around us and feel as if everybody's suspicious. It's to the point where there are times I'd rather stay home than go out, because this is an unknown place to me already, and I don't want to get into a problem that I'm not going to be able to fix. So these are worries I have, and I'm sure other women in the UK do as well.
Thank you, Zara, for sharing your stories. I know that being a woman and a woman of color hasn't been the easiest, but despite some of your experiences in the law profession, some negative experiences that you've had in the law profession, I'm glad you found a positive space and a mentor that has helped you succeed in your profession. So we'll move on to the second round, the second question, which is, what kind of measures should be in place to ensure that women are safe and have access to equal opportunities? And we'll begin with Darcia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, as I was alluding to in the first question, my response to the first question, things have changed. For example, we do have now, and we've had for many years, a rule right in our code of professional conduct, again, speaking from my own context in the legal profession, that talks explicitly about how a lawyer must not, in a professional context, sexually harass any person. The next rule about how a lawyer must not engage in any other form of harassment of any person. And the examples that are given in our commentaries that are meant to flesh out those overall rules and provide guidance to lawyers are very instructive. And one of the lines I've starred when I was reviewing it again for today's talk, and it says, harassment includes all conduct that erodes the dignity and equality of opportunity of the victim. So it's very broad, and it includes things like remarks that would be based on, say, a lawyer's assessment of what a woman can't do, in the office, whether I know it's had been at least common when I was in private practice to kind of try to steer women into family law. I'm so happy that Zara, you've taken up that torch to do it for all the right reasons. What I'm talking about is when women didn't want to do family law and were being forced through their law firms. The guys didn't want to do it. Messy relationship stuff. So let the junior woman handle all the divorces that came in the door, even if that woman wanted to do corporate commercial work. And again, there's a real concern that kind of forcing a lawyer into an area of practice is wrong in and of itself. Secondly, there is a known disparity in billings oftentimes, because in a family situation, when you're having a family breaking up, you're now living families on two separate households, less ability to pay the legal bills when they come to the mailbox or the email box, whereas in the corporate commercial practice, quite often there's no issue at all. You send out your bill and you're paid. So therefore, if you're getting promoted on how much you're billing and collecting, that's going to hold a woman back if she's in an area of law where it's much more difficult to attain those billings levels. So again, in terms of equality, right off the bat, that's not appropriate. sexual harassment is also, there's commentary about what that means. And I'm so happy that we have a lot of examples now so that people can learn. And so, what can be done, what should be done? First of all, women need to know what these rules say. They should educate themselves first, that there are rules in place, that there are a whole bunch of examples given about what is and what may be considered sexual harassment. Right from the blatant, well, if you don't do X, maybe you're going to lose your job, from in terms of sexual impropriety, use of power, again, to import kind of some sexual requirements into the workplace, which of course completely negatively impacts your conditions of employment. But what I really would like to also comment on today is that there's an obligation on all lawyers, male, female, that if right in our code, right under the commentary, it says harassment includes failure by a lawyer who knew or ought reasonably to have known of the harassment to take reasonable steps to prevent or stop the harassment. And so that in and of itself is actionable. If other lawyers out there aren't stepping up, male or female, and doing the right thing by intervening, by saying something to the perpetrator of those inappropriate actions, this is wrong. This is against the code of conduct ethically. You must stop. If people aren't doing that, they are themselves in breach of their ethical obligations under the code. And so if females know that, women lawyers, whatever level they're at, whether they're a junior articling student or even a partner, they need to understand that there are also obligations in others. And I think some pressure could be brought more to bear on others to say, you know what, if you're not doing this, you're actually participating in ethical, the ethical infrastructure of a firm or a work environment is being eroded by your own conduct. You can't just point the finger at the aggressor. You're also part of the problem, and you need to understand that you have an obligation and that you actually must be ethically. You must be part of the solution. So there needs to be more education about that. I was reading, today about something called bystander intervention training, which I actually hadn't heard of. And it talked about how many lawyers have never heard of it. Well, call me guilty. I didn't know what that was. And in 2016, there was a lengthy study in the US, and it said that there should be a lot more focus on the silent majority of the workforce, that is the bystanders. And it's emerging as a best practice in harassment training. And again, many lawyers have never heard of it. So that's certainly something I plan to be bringing up with some of our education counsel here. I think that's an excellent way to kind of chip away and come up with some solutions to these problems. Sadly, it isn't enough just to try to bring the perpetrator, the bad actor, if you will, to discipline. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And again, that's not the way to change. Let's say there's a culture in a workplace where it's known that this kind of stuff is going on, and because of the silence, it becomes accepted. And then maybe other lawyers start behaving the same way to other female lawyers or associates or articling students, and that's terrible, and it must stop. So we are, as a law society, also looking more at entity regulation now. Our code of conduct largely speaks to individual obligations of lawyers, and not a lot of discussion, except in the realm of conflicts of interest when you're transferring from one firm to another. Not a lot of commentary and rules directly related to law firms. And what is the obligation on a law firm to make sure that it has an ethical infrastructure, that there isn't a culture in the workplace that is demeaning to women, that is allowing abuse and harassment and discrimination to happen, to become rampant, to become the norm. So we are working on an assessment tool for law firms. And one of the practice management areas that we're talking about in there is equality, and making sure that firms are actually maybe having some of these difficult conversations, looking inward a little bit, or maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot, right down to things like, it can be subtle. Are you expecting on a Friday after work that everybody goes for drinks or stays for drinks in the boardroom? Well, that was expected of me 30 years ago. Yeah, I can tell you, if I did not feel comfortable saying no to a partner who said drinks in the boardroom, no, it was, you better go or you're going to lose out on an opportunity to maybe even continue working at the firm. So of course, is that unfair to women? Absolutely. Never mind the safety concerns about staying after hours somewhere, drinking in situations where, as we all know, a little bit of alcohol and inhibitions kind of start loosening up, and more power imbalance, inappropriate activity can happen in those situations, and let alone childcare responsibilities. Do you have to go and pick up a child from daycare? Those kinds of things. If you say, well, no, I can't. Oh, you're just the women lawyer who's not putting her career first. Happily, a lot of young male lawyers now are saying they want more work-life balance. They want to be involved and engaged as parents to their children. And I think there's a greater understanding now of having appropriate work-life balance and not pressuring people, whether they are men or women, to stay after hours, to partake in things like having a drink in a boardroom. So I am hopeful. I don't mean to be at all sounding like I'm doing male lawyer bashing, because I'm not. I think that there's hope. There's always hope. And I'm so in awe of women who have had to face these kinds of daily inequities, and do so with a brave face, or whether it's for their own health, if they have to get out of it. I'm upset for them, but happy that they're strong enough to say, you know what, this isn't healthy for me. If I can't change this sufficiently or rely on others to change it, then I just at least have to remove myself from the situation and make sure that I am safe. And but I continue to hold hope that there are not just women out there who recognize that these things are wrong and must stop. We need the voices of men. We need the voices of men who are aware, that they understand. So many men, well, they have wives. They can hear from their own wives their daily struggles. They have daughters. And I know that certainly some men who may not have given it a second thought as a single male, as soon as they get married and or have daughters, suddenly light bulbs go off and they see the world from a different perspective. Oh, I better tell my daughter, be careful when you're going out. I mean, my dad a million years ago told me to make sure that I was watching so nobody put anything in my drinks. And this was going back 30 odd years. And to hear what you're experiencing and what women are experiencing, Zara, is heartbreaking. It's so wrong. It's hard not to just be livid and to just start being in a rage every day about all these inequities. And sometimes it's good to have that anger and to express that anger. I'm as much a believer in that as in education. Tell everybody what their rights are, what their obligations are, and hold people accountable, and do whatever you need to do to have people held accountable, to make that positive change for the future, for the sake of women coming after us. The best thing that a female in a male-dominated world can do to any other female stepping into your profession is to be a mentor, to be a voice for them, maybe when they can't be. I remember many years ago, a female member of the board here, when we were still looking at having this rule on harassment and discrimination put into the code of conduct, spoke very freely about how absolutely it was necessary. And she said, all I'm hearing is a lot of white men, scared of kind of older white men. And I was just, my jaw was dropping, because of course I could never have said that. And I thanked her afterwards privately, and she said, oh, I have tenure. She was actually a university professor who had tenure, and she didn't care at all about speaking out. But I was so grateful. I actually had a lump in my throat. I remember thanking her on behalf of basically all young womanhood Thank you for speaking. So now that I'm, getting into that age bracket, or already in that age bracket, I feel it necessary to be a voice for young women when I get some calls from young students who are being treated inappropriately. And I was so upset at one of the calls that I immediately called up the head of the organization, of the law department, and said, "This is what's happening. It must stop. We must have a meeting so that this must stop." And again, now hearing the gratitude back from a young female is gratifying, and it's reminding me I have an obligation going forward because others did the right thing ahead of me, and we need to do always the right thing, however we can, in our sphere of influence. And women actually also have to, I think, learn to lose the imposter syndrome. I am so guilty of that. And I don't know if you know what that is, but where you think I'm not good enough, or you see an application for a job and you think I only have 9 out of the 10 skills that they're seeking, so I better not apply. And you're like, what? Whereas so often, and there's studies that have been showing this, that a man looking at that job description may have half of them and say, I'd be perfect for that job, and have confidence, put their name in. And of course, they'll get the job because they put their name in. So women have to be their own advocates and help each other and hold each other up and say, of course you can do it, of course, and have that confidence, because it's tough. And it's tough for a reason. We know that we have to historically work harder. We have to do more, be better, to get maybe even less recognition. So I probably used up my time on that second question, but
That's okay.
Passionately about it, so I apologize.
Darcia, thank you. I agree. I think one of the most important things we can do to help change the culture is to educate women of their rights. And I think it starts with making information more accessible, whether it's labor law or human rights law. So thank you for talking about that. We'll move on to Ileah. The floor is yours.
Well, Miigwech, thank you. And, that's a lot of sage advice there from Darcia. So much wisdom there. And I think that you have a lot of wisdom to share. So please keep mentoring, and please keep sharing all of your wise advice and your wisdom. I know that there's many young women out there that could hear one or two of the things you said there, and it'll just change their world, right? So keep going, please keep going. I just wanted to provide an Indigenous point of view from this. I think that in the world we are taught that, yeah, sure, you're a woman, but you should hide it. Just push through it. It's fine. It's not really happening. It's only happening in your head, not in the rest of the world. So what I'm actually referring to here is our monthly cycle. And I think that the workplace would get so much more out of the female race if they were able to put some procedures and some kind of thing that, allows us to be female. In the Indigenous realm, we were actually secluded away from people back in traditional living. We were secluded away from everybody. There was a little tiny hut that you would go to, and an elder would be in there, and she would help you, and she would cook for you, and you would be expected to do no tasks. So for the 3 or 4 days or 5 days it was that you were, experiencing your moon time, you would not have to do anything. And some other people in the community would take up part of whatever you were supposed to be doing. I think that if you have a work culture where you are a team and everybody is there for everybody, no matter what we got to do, okay, you got to take the day off, you got to take the next 2 days off. Sure, let's spread your work duties around. Don't be afraid to come and reach out and ask for it. I think that workplace culture that is sensitive towards women's needs and women's emotional health is at utmost importance. And we've come so far with a workplace culture, and being able to feel safe enough to come forward and say, hey, I just got sexually harassed outside the bathroom. We are able to say that now. We do feel safer now. So I think that the next level is to open the door towards the entire female experience. So that's my take on it. I think that there are so many things like educating, and again, everything Darcia touched point on, that is essential to moving forward. But if we're really trying to get there, and we're really trying to be sensitive towards women in the workplace and provide equal opportunity, then let us work when we can work. And when we need to sit down and take a break, don't punish us. Don't make it seem like it's going to ruin our career because, 3 days out of the month, we can't do it. We just can't. It's physically speaking, it's not possible. So that's my little bit there. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ileah. I think we absolutely have to create opportunities for women, whether it's paid maternity leave or paid, the monthly leave, for us to succeed, and we should start now, and we should be having these conversations. So we're a little short on time. Zara, it's my bad. I completely forgot. I was really enjoying the conversation. So 5 minutes. I'm going to cut you off if you're running a little long. Okay. Okay. Floor is yours.
I just want to piggyback off Ileah and say, Darcia, you have great advice, and I'm super happy to be talking with you today. I think one of the most important things at this moment for me is for women to feel safe, especially in the UK at the moment, is appropriate security measures. Unlike Toronto, where I've had a total different experience, I don't feel like there is enough security checks when going into these big venues. They barely check your ID, they don't check your bags, they don't check your pockets. And Toronto is very different in that sense. If you go to a bar, the least they'll do is check your bag. So I think the minimal they could do is some rigorous security measures in that sense. I don't like to say this because I don't feel like I should have to carry self-defense weapons, but bear mace, pepper spray, I know there's women that do feel a lot more safe carrying things like that. And maybe we should start thinking about changing the regulations on that, just because we have to think about ourselves at the end of the day. And if things like needling is going on, then I don't understand why women cannot have items like that. I also think the venue should hire a lot more security. There's not enough bouncers. They don't do what they need to at all. In terms of work, I think one thing I would like to see established in the legal field and other fields as well is more diversity and inclusion training. I've working in the family law field, I haven't done it for too long, but with seeing the different types of lawyers, I feel like sometimes they're not as empathetic to the different vulnerabilities that people go through. They don't adapt to the client. They just are one way, and sometimes that's not helpful to the client. So I think that lawyers should definitely go through some sort of training of mental health awareness and sexual harassment awareness so that they know how to deal with the issue at hand. I also think promoting gender equality in application processes of jobs and offering equal pay should be a lot more in our faces. I also believe that it should be normalized to talk about our salaries because women are constantly underpaid. My university is actually going on a strike next week for 3 days. And one of the biggest issues is the wage gap. And being an international student, I am literally paying 3 times more than other students. And if my money is not going to equal pay, then I'm not sure why I'm paying so much. I also think creating workshops in workplaces that allow women to be mentors and to be able to show that their ability to work and their gender do not come hand in hand, and that in fact, they're probably equally or even more capable of having different types of roles and positions, whether higher or lower. In terms of domestic violence, I think it should definitely be talked about more. It should be an open conversation. Many people don't realize sometimes that they're in an abusive relationship. There's so many different red flags and signs. Controlling your finances, threatening violence against you, pressuring you to have sex, emotional, physical, financial abuse are all symptoms of an abusive relationship. So I think workplaces should have resources in their offices with respect to domestic violence, whether that's hotlines, shelters, shelter numbers and names, addresses, and just general places for women and men to get some help. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. I definitely agree with what you said and the importance of wage transparency. It's so important. It goes hand in hand when discussing issues about fair recruitment. So we have a couple of questions. I think we can take one or two. So we will start with the first one. How can we ensure that women who report sexual misconduct in workplaces are actually heard and not gaslit, specifically talking about larger corporations or firms? Anyone can answer. The floor is yours.
I can give a few tips here for females out there that have experienced this or are worried about experiencing it. Document everything. When you are having an interaction with another colleague, a coworker, whoever it is in the office space, document it. Write it down. Make a voice note. Just put it in your calendar, whatever it is. Put in details. You can put in verbatim as much as you can remember, and always write the date and time beside your note. These will be used in a court setting or in proceedings within your workplace, that when they call to answer or ask you, what happened, you'll be like, hey, I have exactly what happened. I wrote it down that day. It was disturbing. This is what he said, or what they said. And so the documentation will serve as your evidence and will actually be your backbone moving forward, because it won't be like, hey, I know he said it to me. You'll actually have a piece of paper or whatever document on your phone, likely, that will be your backup. The only other thing would be to look around the room and ensure there's other people so that you can have witnesses. I know it's a tough thing to do, especially now when they're limiting people in the workplace and COVID measures and things like that. But try to ask people around and say, hey, did you see what happened? Could you make note of it as well? Thank you.
And I could just add to that, it would be ideal if the person's experiencing that could also tell somebody else, whether it's somebody within the organization, tell somebody outside the organization, so that later when they say, well, why didn't you, did you tell anybody? Well, no, I didn't. At least if you tell somebody, again, that person can be a witness later. Oh yes, I remember they were so upset that day. They phoned me that night as a girlfriend and they said, this is what happened. And I tried to, let them talk about it, because they were, and again, that person could be a witness. And also to not be afraid to reach out to female mentors, to find somebody, whether it's not even in your own organization, a strong, female mentor somewhere else could probably also give you some really good advice about how best to proceed.
Thank you. I did not think about these strategies. This is very helpful, and hopefully our participants are also listening to these. Our next question is, what effective policies should organizations implement to hold individuals who indulge in malicious activities so that they are held accountable?
I think just following up, it's, I think, really related to her first question. Well, I think organizations should be treating this kind of behavior as seriously as they would, for example, theft from petty cash, or why is a monetary misconduct considered, treated differently? That would be very serious. Oh, that's a breach of integrity. That person can't be trusted, and maybe they're out the door. well, my goodness, the property, if you will, not monetary, but the property of a woman, her own body, her own, safety, security, physically, psychologically, emotionally, in a work environment, needs to be treated. Misconduct in that sphere needs to be treated as seriously, if not more so, than an employee would be, given for an act of theft, for example. Just kind of looking at the two kinds of misconduct, because surely we're at a stage in society where we can recognize that, say, for example, a lawyer stealing $100,000 from a client is horrible, and yes, they should be disbarred. But what about if that lawyer is, engaging in sexual activity with a vulnerable family law client, for example, who's already in a position of being vulnerable, and then there's the imbalance in the relationship, etc. So, I know we had a decision years ago where one of the members of our panel said as much and said, certainly this kind of conduct is egregious. Let's call it egregious, so that there isn't just the slap on the wrist kind of, oh, well, why should we complain because they'll just get a slap on the wrist. There has to be some penalty that is kind of in accordance with the nature of the harm, and you're harming a person. So surely to goodness that should have some serious consequences attached to it.
I definitely agree with Darcia. I think that we should be amending legislation to make it a lot more stricter. I know there's repeating offenders, that first-time offenders don't get too much of a punishment, and then they come back and become repeat offenders. So we need to start thinking about what type of regulations and what type of consequences should these people get on the first offense, rather than allowing them to be a repeat offender.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I stopped.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add, you get a harsher punishment for hurting an animal here in Canada than you do for hurting a woman. So yeah, the harsher punishments are definitely something that we need broadly across Canada, just in legislation and in criminal code. But within the workplace, I think that the best thing that can happen is before you join a workplace, ask them what their workplace culture is, ask them what their grievance structure is, and ask them if there is a grievance structure. And asking these questions in the interviewing process will give you the feel for the workplace culture. I find that the interviewing process now, for me at least, is not about the job. It's not about them hiring me. It's not about me getting paid. It's about, what are you doing in your workplace? What is your workplace like? How are the people doing in your workplace? What's mental health like? I have asked those questions recently in job interviews. I get serious answers, and it also shows me through their tone, their body language, what they will do and how they will how approachable they will be. So thank you.
Thank you. They're all really, really good insight. We are a little short on time, but there's one more question. I think it's pretty important. This is our last question. So here it is. We know that it's important to educate our male counterparts about the imbalance of power from an early age in an attempt to change this patriarchal culture we live in. What kind of approaches should caregivers and parents take to educate their children?
I definitely think from a very young age, we should start talking about the inequalities that women do face, and that it's not right. I think it just starts with having those conversations and making sure your son or your daughter knows that a woman is not less than a man, and that we can do what they can do, and vice versa. That's what I think. I think it just comes down to being able to teach them in a very neutral way where we're all the same.
And just to add to that, yes, of course, we have to teach our daughters how to be safe in the realities of this world. But we need to be teaching our sons that they have obligations to speak up, to not be silent bystanders. Whether we're talking about bullying, now there's more people recognizing that, no, you need to say something. That's how you stop a bully, is you stop the perpetration of this activity by calling them out, by more and more people saying what needs to be said. So we need to be educating our sons from an early age, very early, that these things that are going on are wrong. You not only can you do something to help stop it, you have a responsibility to do it, a moral responsibility, just as a human being.
Thank you. I think we're at time for our Q&A session, so I'll end it over here. Thank you to our audience for attending, and thank you, Darcia, Ileah, and Zarah, for your time and sharing your experiences and highlighting such important issues and solutions to create a safe environment for women and girls to succeed. I will now turn over the mic to our Executive Director, Dr. Kasir, Ahmed, for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Khujista, for a wonderful moderation. And throughout the whole episode, I was deeply listening, and I was feeling myself a little bit of, I would say, sad for one single reason, that it is 2021, and we are still talking about very fundamental facts about human relationships. Well, being a male, I would not claim a lot of things that I have personally done, but I was thinking myself, what have I done in my relationship with the females in my family, colleagues, and co-workers? And this is particularly made me very sad that we are still talking about, if I quote Darcia's one of the reflections, that if in 2021 we need to look over our shoulder walking from cars to office, then we really have to ask what kind of progress we have made in terms of civilization. I leave the audience with this question, but just to wrap up this wonderful discussion with regards to our International Day of Elimination Violence Against Women, I would like to also remind the viewers today that we are talking about half of our world population, those who support us, those who grow us, those who put us in our career track, then so that we can grow and achieve so many things. And let's not forget women in refugee camps. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada works in refugee camps in Bangladesh for Rohingya females. We are working to educate them. We have two running projects. We call it Peace Building Through Educations. And given my very humble exposure to the situation in Rohingya refugee camps, I take this privilege to share my appeal with the greater audience today, and also the panelists. Let's do something for them, because they are unable to come here today to share the same platform that you folks have done. They don't have any capacity to share their stories with you. I wish I could have done some arrangements to bring some of them, but this is what is the problem in our system. And as a student and educator in structural violence, I totally agree that the structure that we have created over the years and millennia has oppressed women to the maximum. And also when we talk about war, when we talk about displacement like Syria and all the ethnic civil wars, women and children are the most disproportionately affected group of human beings on the God's earth. So on today's activities, I also recall United Nations 16 Days of Activism, which has been launched today, which will end on 10th of December. What a fantastic coincidence, because 10th of December is celebrated as the International Human Rights Day. So let me appeal on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, and also thanking the wonderful panelists and so insightful discussion they have brought today, that let's do something till 10th of December so that we can proudly say that we have made some difference in 2021. So ladies and gentlemen, with this note, I wish best of luck And I would also like to thank Khujista Rahman for planning this event and implementing it so beautifully. Thank you, Khujista. And the audience, stay wherever you are safe, and think about women who is very important in your life. Take care and goodbye.